The SEGA Genesis Mini is the hot new retro mini console that's out there. There are 42 video games on this device, and I played them all, for a little bit at least, and I wanted to give you guys my thoughts on each of these games, kind of as they stand now. One thing that was surprising for me is that I thought I had a pretty good handle on lots of these SEGA Genesis titles when they originally came out, but I was surprised that there were tons on this collection that I had never even played or touched before. I did for this, and I've got some thoughts on these titles right now. We're going to start with Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle. This is an action-adventure platformer where you're bouncing on different baddies, including little cars and stuff that are out to get you. Charming music, but it didn't really hold my interest. It just felt too dated, and it didn't really hold a candle to the Mario franchise, which I think Sega was trying to, directly compete against. I know that this is going to hurt a lot of your hearts out there, but I would give Alex Kidd a 5 out of 10 in terms of my engagement with that title. Alisia Dragoon, this was a really slick experience where you play this female warrior that's got these allies, these animal allies with different abilities. It's incredibly challenging. Beautiful, though. Great sprite-based graphics. Super impressed with the animations and the abilities and the sense of fun and danger. I give that one an 8.5 out of 10. Altered Beast, pretty formidable experience back in 1989 when I first got my SEGA Genesis, but man, it does not hold up. It has not aged well at all. Super dated graphics, some iffy collision. It was fun turning into the animals, but yeah, I would not really be psyched on continuing to play Altered Beast in 2019. I'm giving that game a 5 out of 10. Beyond Oasis was a great surprise. I experienced the surprise when I played the SEGA Genesis collection on my Nintendo Switch. I'd never played Beyond Oasis before, but great to see it here. It's a really cool take on the Zelda-style action-adventuring. Huge sprites and great character designs. This is a really cool game. 8.5 for Beyond Oasis. Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. I had this cartridge for my SEGA Genesis. I love this game. I've loved being able to show it off to my kid. Very accessible, very easy to enter the gameplay experience. I played this with my girlfriend back in the day when I had the SEGA Genesis. She's now my wife, and it's cool to now be playing it with my kid. This is a classic. You can tell it was made with a lot of love, and it's got a lot of heart. I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. Castlevania Bloodlines. This is an excellent Castlevania game. You get a couple of different story through lines with different characters, different mechanics, and cool power-ups, and lots of great beasties. The sprite work is great. It's not like the GBA style of Castlevania experience. It's a little bit more kind of linear. You're just trying to get to the end and fight the bosses, but it's still super, super slick. Great that it's included on this collection. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Columns. Now, this is a very basic match 3 puzzle game, and it's really hard for me to get excited about puzzle games included on this collection because we've got so many derivatives to choose from on every platform imaginable, including phones. I would give the SEGA Genesis version of Columns in 2019 a 4.5 out of 10. Comix Zone. Now, this is a game that I'm always happy to see no matter what platform I play it on. I played it on everything, but it's great to play it again on the SEGA Genesis Mini. Very original take. Actually have a little hand draw in characters and you gotta beat up bad guys. It's a challenging game. It's a short game, but man, it is incredibly stylish. I love Comix Zone. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Contra Hardcore. This is another classic from Konami. I'm so glad that it's included on the Genesis Mini. I just played it in the Contra collection. It's wonderful. You get a lot of different character choices, including a little robot. Got all kinds of fantastic weapons. The enemy types are amazing. It's incredible to see. It's so Terminator influenced. It is just such a treat to play. And it's super fast, super challenging, but a blast in single player or co-op. This is a classic 9.5 from me. Darius. Now, this is a new addition to the SEGA Genesis. It never actually came out back in the day, but it's on this machine. It's a great space shooter. I was very happy with the cool mechanics and choosing your different weapon loadouts on the fly. This is a great addition to this library. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. This is a game that's kind of played out as well. You can call it Puyo Puyo, or you can call it Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. Listen, I know that there's a lot of people that love this experience. For me, I've played it a million times. I know what it's all about. It's still fun, but it's just it's been eclipsed. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Dynamite Headdy, now this was great to jump back into. You play kind of like an insectoid, robot-y type little character that has the ability to transform into different characters, but also latch onto things and bounce up. There's a lot of great mechanics in this game and lots of crazy animations and really cool background art. I was super impressed to see this game included on the collection. It's always a ton of fun to play Dynamite Headdy. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Earthworm Jim is on this collection, and this is one of the seminal titles in the video game industry. Really represented this incredible group of developers from Virgin going off on their own and showing the world what they could do with this insane idea of an earthworm that becomes a superhero, loaded with all kinds of different game mechanics and great art and cool music from our buddy Tommy Tallarico. This is an amazing game. 9.5 out of 10. It's a shame that Earthworm Jim 2 isn't included on this one. Ecco the Dolphin. This is also wonderful to see on this collection. This is another one of those games that doesn't necessarily get the love that it deserves because it's so unique and original. We don't really get to play as dolphins in too many titles, and this was wonderfully developed. It's challenging and it's also atmospheric, and it just puts you into this calm state until it's not calm, until you keep dying because you can't beat a puzzle, but it's a really cool experience. I'm going to give Ecco the Dolphin an 8 out of 10. Eternal Champions is a bit of a weird game to play because it's a 6-button game and this is a 3-button controller. I like this game. You play a bunch of manufactured superheroes that Sega built back in the day, you know, like sort of a beast character and an underwater character and a kind of a stealthy thief type character. The graphics were pretty amazing back in the day. Of course, they look super dated now and chunky and clunky, but still, there's something about this game that has always spoke to me. It's my love of superheroes for sure, and I love the ambition of the title. It just feels a little awkward to press the start button to switch between the different movesets. I'm going to give this game, to revisit it again, a 7.5 out of 10. Ghouls and Ghosts is an excellent Genesis game and incredibly challenging, but super addictive. Lots of great little details in the animations as you're trying to get from this graveyard to a castle and defeat the different creatures and bosses along the way. Super tough, just like it is in every version of this title, but it's a wonderful fit in here. I'm going to give Ghouls and Ghosts an 8.5 out of 10. Golden Axe. Now, I'm a huge fan of this franchise. You can play as a male or female warrior or a dwarf, and you get to kick around a little gnome that will steal your stuff, and you get to call down all kinds of magic power effects and ride beasties. This is a lot of fun when you play it with a buddy, and it's cool that it's included here. It's definitely one to check out, but it is a bit disappointing that more of the Golden Axe franchise isn't on there. I'm going to give Golden Axe, as it stands, the original, an 8 out of 10. Gunstar Heroes. Now, this is a true treasure from the developers at Treasure. You play a couple of different sci-fi enthused characters that battle all kinds of enemies and bosses. Sometimes you'll be jumping up on installations, sometimes you'll be sliding down slopes or trying to navigate these crazy types of scenarios with these awesome weapons that you're given. This is a wonderful game that really showcased the horsepower of the Sega Genesis console, but also the imagination that Treasure had with mixing everything up. Just the fact that you can kind of choose your own path in the game is wonderful. This is super, super fun to play. It's one of the easiest games to just jump into no matter what year it is, what era in gaming it is, and just have a total blast. I'm giving Gunstar Heroes a 10 out of 10. Kid Chameleon, this was a game that I bought for my Genesis back in the day, and I always thought it was so cool that you could transform into these different types by just sort of changing your headgear. Not unlike Super Mario Odyssey. The graphics are definitely dated and underwhelming, but the gameplay is still pretty fun. You know, lots of bouncy areas and bosses to stab with swords and ledges to jump on that will disappear. We've played this kind of thing a million times before, but that mechanic of constantly switching the kind of character that you are, that still works. That still works in 2019. I'm going to give Kid Chameleon a 7.5 out of 10. Landstalker is an isometric action-adventure game in the style of Zelda, but you're doing a little bit of jumping and stuff. I found this game really cool artistically and ambitious with the character designs and the artwork and all that stuff, and even the camera perspective, but I found it insufferably difficult to make the jumps and control my character the way that I wanted to. This is a tough game. It's a grindy game to get anywhere in it because you're constantly battling the perspective that you have and the navigation system that they've packed into this title. title. I know that there's a lot to enjoy and love in this game, but you're going to have to give it some patience, and you're going to have to give it some time. And as I was bouncing through these 42 games to kind of give you this report, I didn't have a lot of time or patience for this title, but I still appreciate the beauty of it for sure. Right now, as it stands, as my sort of dive into it to kind of appreciate how it plays in 2019, I'm going to give Landstalker a 7 out of 10. Light Crusader, and this is also an isometric action-adventure role-playing experience made by Treasure. A lot of Treasure games on this. That fared a little bit better, even though it is a sort of three-quarter isometric perspective and there are navigation issues, like you try to move a box onto something. There was something really compelling about dungeon designs and the level designs and the character interactions and the artwork. This is a wonderful game. I discovered this game because I'd never played it before on the SEGA Genesis Collection for my Switch, and I was wowed by the really competent design, the really cool sort of touches of the title, and I loved seeing it again on the SEGA Genesis Mini. I absolutely think you should check this game out. I think you're going to be wonderfully surprised. I'm giving Light Crusader an 8 out of 10. Mega Man The Wily Wars, this is a great game, and it's super cool that it's included on the Genesis Mini collection. It's a collection of the first 3 NES Mega Man titles. You have got to muster all of the patience to get through all of these games, which, you know, introduce all of these super cool bosses that then you can pull their powers from. It's cool that even back in the 16-bit days, they were collecting and archiving the past, allowing players to, you know, stay tuned to the resonance that these early games kind of delivered. They're incredible games, no matter when you play them, and it's awesome that you get to play them again on this really cool little device. I'm going to give Mega Man The Wily Wars a 9 out of 10. Next up is Monster World 4, which is actually the 6th game in the Wonder Boy Monster World franchise. You play a female heroine named Asha, and this has got great cutesy graphics like all the Monster World games do, kind of squished and super deformed, but adorable. Battle all kinds of beasties and creatures, and you've got some cool sword attacks and stuff, and do a lot of traveling. It's an action-adventure platformer. Absolutely overjoyed to see Monster World 4. I'm going to give that an 8.5 out of 10. You also get the 5th game in the Wonder Boy Monster World franchise. This is Wonder Boy in Monster World. This one you play a little male hero and you're running around taking care of all kinds of bad guys, little scrunchy monsters and things. You get a sword to begin with not very much range, and I found it difficult to time my attacks with my short little stubby sword before the monsters got me, and then I got that eventual game over screen. This is a game that takes a little while before you get to those save points. You're talking to townsfolk and you're leveling up and you're getting better weapons and battling bigger beasties and stuff. Super cute. Cool soundtrack, it's charming, but be prepared to have a little bit of patience when you play this one. I'm giving Wonder Boy in Monster World a 7.5 out of 10. Phantasy Star 4, The End of the Millennium is included on here. This was a massive hit for RPG fans on the SEGA Genesis days. I didn't ever play the Phantasy Star games. I was more into the action stuff and the fighting games and the platformers and stuff. I didn't really get into too many RPGs. I preferred like Zelda type experiences, but it's really fun to go back and, see the complexities of the storytelling and the different mechanics and the different character types that you're going to meet up with. This is great that it's included, but it's weird that there aren't more Phantasy Star games. Even still, I was impressed by Phantasy Star 4. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Road Rash 2 is an excellent addition to the SEGA Genesis Mini. This was a game that I had in my collection back in the day. I loved the whole sort of fusion of beating the crap out of your opponents and racing past them. Lots of great touches like flying off of your bike and having to walk back and get back on it and try to keep up, and the cops chasing you, and all kinds of obstructions and obstacles and things that you have to navigate and avoid across the road, but also just slightly off the road. Excellent game. I'm going to give Road Rash 2 an 8.5 out of 10. Shining Force. Now, this is a game that's been collected in different SEGA Genesis collections, including the recent one that I was playing on the Switch. Great to see it on here. It's a little bit like playing a Fire Emblem type of experience, a turn-based strategy game. A little bit more rudimentary in its sort of game design, but really nice character work, great art, and a cool, compelling story. Lots of dialogue and interplay going between these different characters. I can see why this was such a smash for the Genesis. I can can see why it's included on the Mini. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Now, of course, you've got to have a Shinobi game on the SEGA Genesis Mini. You get Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master. That's exactly what you are. You're a badass with shurikens and blade weapons, and you get all kinds of great magic attacks. You're going to be fighting other ninjas, but you're also going to be infiltrating enemy installations, and it's a great fusion of kind of feudal Japan stuff mixed with super twisted, weird, modern technology. Reminds me a little bit of the Ninja Gaiden games, the more recent Ninja Gaiden games, but I was really impressed with the mechanics and the art style. This is a wonderful, wonderful addition. Shinobi 3 gets a 9.5 from me. Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and 2 are both included on the SEGA Genesis Mini. You don't get more of the traditional core Sonic games, but 1 and 2 are phenomenal titles. What you notice when you check them both out is just the precision of the design, and it's interesting to kind of contrast the Sonic games with the other platformers that are on here because they're so precise and they're so creatively made, but they look like they're made by a team of developers with like heightened senses and superpowers. There's incredible precision and beautiful art, beautiful animations. Of course, these games were so important to me in my original OG Sega Genesis days, but it's wonderful that they're included here. Great gaming to show off to maybe younger players out there and fans of nostalgia. Both of these titles, even though you've played them before and you've seen them in a million different places, but both of these titles, you can't dispute they're 10 out of 10 games. Now, the other Sonic game that you get is Sonic the Hedgehog Spinball, and this was a weird kind of diversion where they tried to cram Sonic into a pinball experience, not unlike the superior Kirby's Pinball Land for the Nintendo Game Boy. You've got all kinds of animated backgrounds and different kinds of levels and layers that you have to bounce Sonic into. Got this beast that will come out of the green goo and try to eat you. It's challenging, and there is some enjoyment to be had, but the physics of Sonic bouncing around just felt too loosey-goosey and weird, and it just didn't handle right. There was something about it. Maybe it's a frame rate thing, or there's just too many different widgets that they tried to show off on screen. You can certainly appreciate the artistic qualities of the game. It just doesn't deliver in the fluidity and the flow department, which is kind of baffling for a Sonic the Hedgehog game in the 16-bit era. I'm going to give Sonic Spinball a 6.5 out of 10. Space Harrier 2 is a nice addition to the Genesis Mini library. This was a super cool arcade experience where you're traveling into a world and then you're shooting at all kinds of bad guys and bosses and things that are coming directly at you. Mind-blowing when you saw this back in the 80s. Still impressive to see that the engineers at SEGA were able to kind of figure out how to deliver something pseudo 3D on a machine that just wasn't really built for 3D. Definitely looks dated, it definitely looks clunky, but there's still this charm about this game, especially when the guy screams so loud when he gets shot or runs into a tree or something like that. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition is included on here, and you know that they were going to throw in a Street Fighter 2 game. Street Fighter 2, so important and so integral to many consoles, but especially the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. This is a good port where you can really kind of amp up the speed, and you get a nice roster of all the Street Fighter 2 characters. You're traveling all over, the deal with Street Fighter. It plays well in spite of the fact that you're bouncing back and forth between the button layout because there's only 3 buttons on the controller, but it's still fun to play. It's just, we've played this in a million different ways. It's hard. They had to include a fighting game as seminal and important as Street Fighter on here. They arguably could have thrown Mortal Kombat on here as well. I'm glad that it's here. We've just played Street Fighter a lot, and there are better Street Fighter experiences, in my opinion. But Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition, I'm going to give that an 8 out of 10. Streets of Rage 2 is the only one of the 3 Sega Genesis Streets of Rage games that made it to the Sega Genesis Mini. Arguably the best one out of the trilogy. Fantastic music, we know that. Great characters. I played as Skate when I was playing, and just so 90s, skating around, doing headbutts, doing breakdance moves to take down bad guys, and jumping and flipping and flying all over the place. It was just fun. Crazy, insane, neon-colored, totally enjoyable. This was a great brawler, one of the best, I think, across the entire spectrum of 16-bit brawlers, and there were tons of them, but this is, if it's not the best, it's absolutely one of the best. It's a great, great addition on this collection. I just, I'm baffled why we didn't get the trilogy. The Streets of Rage games are so fun, and perfect to play with another person beside you. I love this game. 10 out of 10. Strider. Now, I was happy to see Strider included on here. I was very happy to see third-party games in this collection, but I was not prepared for how disappointed I was to play this again. I think this was a game that was super cool in its day, but to play it again in 2019, really piss-poor collision detection. It just felt so ambiguous when you were jumping up and trying to battle any of the bad guys, whether you were going to hit them or not. I felt like the game was super cheap. You die quickly, mostly because of the size of the sprite and the kind of flat backgrounds that you have, and it was just difficult to play and navigate through the game. You know, there's some cool elements. I like the kind of Russian art style on this thing, but I feel like Strider is one of those games that plays better in your memory than it does when you play it again. Very disappointed by the play of Strider. Even though I dug the aesthetics, I'm only going to give it a 4.5 out of 10. I wouldn't go back to this one. Super Fantasy Zone is an excellent addition to this library because it's such a cool, quirky take on space shooters. You have got this great pastel-colored world that you're blasting through. It's a little bit like a Defender type game where you're cruising on this lateral kind of plane and you're taking care of all of these different enemies, but the enemies might be flowers or little bugs or something. Still difficult, still challenging, but incredibly charming. I love that this game is here, and I love this game. I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. One of the interesting additions to the SEGA Genesis Mini is the SEGA Genesis version of Tetris, and I'm glad that it's here because everybody can play Tetris, especially if you play it with somebody else. But man, this is pretty weak sauce in 2019. We've had many, many excellent versions of Tetris over the years. Didn't like the music, felt the controls were a little bit clunky, and the animations, honestly, were a little bit clunky. Yes, it's going to be one of those games that you're going to have that nostalgic sort of hook to give it a shot, but yeah, I'm not super impressed by the 2019 version of Tetris on the SEGA Genesis Mini. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Thunder Force 3 is another space shooter that you get in this collection, and it's terrific. It's incredibly challenging. Different worlds that you get to explore and different bosses that you're going to battle depending on those worlds. Lots of navigation challenges and also switching your loadouts on the fly with great weapon effects. This is a blast. You know, the Genesis handled these sprite-based space shooters so well, and this is an extraordinary example of that. I'm going to give Thunder Force 3 a 9 out of 10. Toe Jam and Earl was a very weird SEGA Genesis game. It actually got a sequel, which isn't included on here, but this was about these two different funky aliens with the funky soundtrack, and the game actually is an adventure title where you're trying to find the different elements of your spaceship. You're going into these elevators, going from world to world, and you're avoiding these weird different enemy types like a little Cupid chasing you or a little devil chasing you as you collect these presents, which might be sneakers that allow you to run super fast, or you might get some wings that will help you fly from one area of the world to another. Crazy art style, super charming, super weird, very different experience from everything else that's included in this collection, and that's why it's so worthy. I'm going to give Toe Jam and Earl an 8 out of 10. You get Vectorman 1, not 2, on this SEGA Genesis Mini collection. Vectorman was a very cool game with a ton of attitude and a ton of charm. Kind of evokes a little bit of that Wily deal. You play this robot that's got to battle other robots in the ruins of Earth. We have destroyed Earth with pollution and slime and sludge, so it's just robots that are left. You're this collection of different balls stacked on each other, and you can transform into these different types, and you also get different weapon types as well. So there's a lot of variety and diversity in the core animations of the character, which were really cool, and that was the standout feature here. But of course, Sega was trying to deliver something completely fresh. I remember when they launched Vectorman originally, they had a contest for the people that could play the game best. They would pay them, the winner of the contest, to try to drum up hype because there were so many licensed titles back then that this game had to compete against, and so many sequels and things, and this was Sega trying to create a brand new franchise character. I always loved Vectorman. I'm glad that it's included here, but again, it's a little bit weird that you only get the first one and not the second one as well. I'm giving Vectorman an 8 out of 10. Now, Sega also released Virtua Fighter 2 for the Genesis, but the less said about this game, the better. This was a 3D game that was awesome on the Sega Saturn, but by 1996, when this game was released on the Genesis, it just couldn't hold up. Sprites instead of polygons. It didn't make sense at all. It's a weird abomination. I guess it's included on this collection as kind of like this nostalgic trip, but it's completely unnecessary, and you're not going to be playing this game. If you want to play Virtua Fighter 2, you're going to be playing it on a console that can handle 3D graphics. So I'd give Virtua Fighter 2 on the Sega Genesis a 2 out of 10. And the last game included on the SEGA Genesis Mini is World of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. Maybe not as tight as Castle of Illusion, but there's a little bit more breadth because you get to play as both Donald and Mickey. Super cool, magical kinds of abilities for these characters. Mickey Mouse starts with the ability to kind of wave his magic robe and turn enemies into flowers. It's so sweet. It's super easy to play. It's super accessible. Great little soundtrack. Great animation style in there as well. Lovely game. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. So there you go. As you can tell, the SEGA Genesis Mini is loaded with terrific games that definitely stand the test of time. There's a couple in there that I probably would have traded out for something else, and I'll talk about that in a separate video. But that gives you a pretty good rundown of all of the different games and my initial thoughts on all of these titles. Clearly, I haven't had time to finish every single one in here, but I got a nice little taste of all of them, and I am pleased by this collection.